My name is Ann Butler-Rice. I'm the Director of Education at the Wadsworth, and I'm very happy to welcome our Zoom audience today and to introduce our speaker, Vanessa Sigalis, who is a research fellow at the Wadsworth in the Department of European Decorative Arts. Vanessa has been with us at the museum since 2011. She worked on the reinstallation of the European art collection in 2015. The exhibition, the small exhibition she's going to be talking about, is on the first floor of the museum. Stories in Ivory and Wood Told by Master Carvers is open through October 31st. And we hope you've had a chance to see it. And if you haven't, that this talk will encourage you to come and see it. So thank you to Vanessa, and I will turn it over to her.
Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, good afternoon. I'm going to be introducing you to this little small exhibition, very exquisite small exhibition at the Wadsworth, which we opened recently. And I had the great pleasure of curating this exhibition together with my dear friend and boss, Linda Roth, the director of Special Curatorial Projects and Senior Curator of European Decorative Arts here at the museum. But I also really wanted to give a big shout out to our education team at the museum here, who were like really involved in not only like reading and editing our labels, but really also involved in like providing context and really developing with us the concept of this exhibition. So there was one time Anne, who you've seen just a moment ago, and also like a big shout out to Gemma Holchen, our evaluation and digital interpretation specialist here at the museum. So Stories in Ivory and Wood, Told by Master Carvers, is divided into three parts, or three rooms actually, if we were in the galleries, which I really encourage you to go visit at some point if you can. The first room here focuses on two phenomenal works of art, both carved, one in ivory here on the left and one in boxwood on the right, by a master carver who is known to us today only by the name Master of the Saint Sebastian Martyrdoms. I'll explain why in a second. The main focus is really on detailed looking works of art with incredible, exceptional carving. I mean, natural materials have been used for carving since ancient times, but in the 1600s, Northern European sculptors created remarkable works of art using these two materials, ivory and boxwood. They were ideal for carving because they allowed fine detailing and beautiful surfaces, as we will see. These rather small-scale sculptures were often illustrated familiar stories from the Bible and mythology, and we have here two Bible stories, which we will decode in a second in detail. But yeah, who was this Master of the Saint Sebastian Martyrdoms? To be quite frank, we almost know nothing about him. The two works on view here in this gallery are among 22 sculptures which we attribute to him today. So it is a really rare and exceptional moment here to have them side by side, two different materials in an exhibition. And one, you might know that the one here on the left, The Fall of Man in Ivory, is owned by the Wadsworth and is usually on view in our Cabinet of Art and Curiosity, which I will show you in a second too. We were fortunate enough to be able to borrow this exceptional relief panel in boxwood from a private collector here in the United States. And this is really the first time you can see these two together. So a world premiere for ivory people and boxwood people. So yeah, but the Master of the Saint Sebastian Martyrdom, this weird name, is really coming from one of or two panels that are known by him that depict actually the story of the Martyrdom of Saint Sebastian. Here on the left, you see one of the two panels, which is in the Kunsthistorische Museum in Vienna. We know that the master worked in Vienna at the court of Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand III in the mid-1600s. But he was probably initially from southern Germany, which was really a center for ivory carving back in the day. Although ivory carvers did not usually sign their names, the most they did is sometimes monogram them, we recognize this master when we look at his carving styles and finding similarities in them. So here we have two Boxwood and an ivory sculpture, one in the British Museum and one in the Metropolitan Museum. And they really show what we have to look for when we're looking for this carver. It is really like he excels in dynamic striding postures. All of his figures are really like athletic. Hands and feet, muscles and fingers and toes are carved with remarkable precision. And even though he didn't sign it with his name, he might have signed it with something different. So what we find in a lot of his sculptures is really a little tiny detail, and we have to look at his toes, and we see his feet depicted with splayed toes. So this is his secret signature, as you might say, and we'll see that in a lot of his works. What is also exceptional about him, he was able to like carve emotions in a way that almost no other artist could. His faces are highly expressive and his emotions are readable on the faces. Also, when art historians attribute works by style, they look at like small details like hair and beards, which are here carved with long parallel strands, often wavy, to suggest also like backwards, also like a little bit to suggest like movement. What also is really points to this artist is that he was able to carve deep folds, which really like bleed then into the background of the reliefs. But now we have a closer look at our object, at the Fall of Man, which he executed around 1650. So it tells us the story of the fall of man, the account in the Hebrew Bible's book of Genesis, and describes how Adam and Eve came to be banished from the Garden of Eden. There are actually not one moment, but several key moments depicted in this narrative. Here we see one moment when Eve reaches for the apple from the snake, from the serpent, but notice also how the serpent turns, his upper body turns into a little boy or puto. We also see a second moment when actually Eve hands the apple to Adam, who takes it. It is really interesting, again, to note, to look at their faces and their expression. And we had like lots of discussions among ourselves, and we think like, see how like Eve looks outwards, rather emotionless, while Adam like looks down with a like troubled face. And we talked about this a lot, that each one of you might have a different interpretation about what a really emotional process like is going in them, or what they really experience here. What is also is important, that is Adam and Eve are still nude, so they're still unaware of their nakedness. So it is actually the moment before they eat the fruit. They stand at the roots of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, surrounded by wildlife described in the biblical passages, like really representing paradise. We see parrot, camel, elephant, young stag, and something that might be a female turkey. I know Linda spent hours and hours looking at the animal and looking what it might be. Behind Adam and Eve here, and actually, and under their foot, we'll see a turkey, a rabbit, vulture, and a lion. The artist really took also great care in distinguishing the almost human-like expressions of the animal faces here. While the rabbit or hare looks almost like a little bit timid, the lion seems to be bored. The differentiation of the various surfaces is another characteristic of our master carver. And then also another point I wanted to make here, and you'll see later why, is that this relief is really carved from one single piece of ivory, so not glued together or everything. And if you go into the exhibition, you can look from it from the back, and you actually see it even more like this is really like one piece. Now we go to the other object that we feature in this exhibition, the Agony of the Garden. We think it might be executed only slightly later. So this dramatic box relief depicts the moment before Jesus' capture by the Roman soldier in the New Testament. So it's a story from the Gospels. And here, for a boxwood piece, the relief is rather large, and it consists actually of 6 strips of boxwood that we can see here. You can see the breaks here on the lines. We are in the Garden of Gethsemane at the foot of Mount Olives. It is night. As we can see here, the moon is up and the moon has even a face. It's really cool to see. It is after the Last Supper, just moments before Jesus got arrested. Judas has already betrayed him. And here we have a rather linear storytelling from left to right, instead of a staggered one, as we've seen with the fall of man. Judas literally makes a step here into the left, into the story. He's holding the money bag with the 30 pieces of silver, the reward for his betrayal, in his right hand. And Jesus is here praying slightly off center with if you would be in the gallery, you could see like this halo here is actually almost 3D looking, coming out of the relief. So again, I encourage you, come visit and look at it closely. Jesus is looking up to a group of angels who hold a chalice and the instruments of the passion, the cross, the nails, the lance, etc. Here, you see this. And in the foreground, we see his sleeping disciples who fell asleep despite Jesus' request to stay up with him the night and pray with him. Here we have Peter, bald-headed with a cross close to his chest. We have James the elder with a mustache, and we have a rather young-looking, youthful John with curly, long hair. The carving of this relief is, again, if you look in detail, extraordinary. The emotional intensity really is, in my opinion, unbelievable. Every attention to detail, the mimic and gesture that he was able to carve out of this piece of boxwood is really astonishing. Every emotion is readable for us. And again, we see the rich folds which blend into the background. And we see here his signature, the slate toes again. It is really such a rare opportunity to compare these two carvings by the same hand in two different materials side by side. But also thematically, the links between the two stories are very interesting. They both address in different manners a concept, like the concept of faithful decisions. That's how we framed it and themed it in our exhibition, and their consequences. So on the one hand, if we compare the two, here we have the Genesis story, and then we have the gospel stories, Old Testament, New Testament. We have the Garden Eden in the fall of man, heaven, paradise, the tree of knowledge. If we go over to the Agony Garden, we are in the garden, again, another garden, Garden of Gethsemane, we're on earth, Mount Olives. Here, the main characters are two people, Adam and Eve. And here on this are also two people, Judas and Jesus. The faithful decision here is really like Eve takes the forbidden apple from the serpent and Adam takes the apple from Eve. And then on the other hand, the faithful decision is Judas's decision to betray Jesus. So what are the consequences? The consequences in the fall of man here is really Adam and Eve become aware of their nakedness. They got thrown out of paradise and sin has been brought to the world. On the Agony of the Garden, the story ends with the Passion of Christ that starts. At the end of it, Jesus gives his life as a sacrifice to redeem mankind of its sin, which was brought by Adam and Eve. All of this, of course, is very, very simplified. I know there's been theories over the centuries, over decades and centuries about these stories and how they were interpreted by different religions and different interpretations. So this is really simplified, but since really Christian thinkers, since Paul the Apostles have drawn parallels between Adam and Eve, and I think that's another interesting parallel here to look at. But again, if we look very closely and compare the emotions in these main characters, it is really astonishing what this artist was able to convey. The second room of the small exhibition is really all about the workshop practices, making, and the materials themselves. It's about providing the context by which this incredible artist was surrounded, where he lived and worked, but also to put him into perspective. All of the objects that we chose in this room are from a really rather small area. They're all from southern Germany, Swiss, Austria, an area where ivory carving and goldsmithing also really flourished. we talk about what is a master and how to become a master in the 17th century. You had to follow a fixed curriculum, really, of training and traveling. First start as an apprentice, then become a journeyman, and then travel to finesse your craft. And then in most cases, you had to be fortunate enough to inherit a workshop or marry the workshop's master's widow. But we also explain how workshops operated really back then. By looking at this, for example, at this small panel of St. George and the Dragon, we know all over the world we know of 8 very similar versions of this little panel. 6 are in Boxwood and 2 are in ivory. The Boxwood here is on view in the show. It's in our collection. And then I picked up an ivory version from the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. All of these are based on the same print source here by Antonio Tempesta, the etching here. But they all like have a slightly different background. All of these boxwood and ivories were likely made by the same workshop, as it was common to reproduce an already established motif, which was liked by clients and was well sold, and even in different media. So that depended really on the client's wishes and also what he could afford. Again, through stylistic comparisons, some scholars believe that these panels were made by Domenico Steinhardt, one of a family of German sculptors, or his workshop or his circle. However, other scholars really disagree and attribute the panels to the geographic area of southern Germany rather than to a specific workshop. So this shows you really like art historians are not always aligned. There's lots of discussion going on, different views. There's also always new research coming out that we look at. So we don't know a lot, like the big scheme of thing a lot, but we know a lot, but not everything I wanted to say about these really old works of art. Another point we wanted to make is like really through the direct comparison of the two materials like boxwood and ivory right next to each other, we can also show that despite their visual differences, they actually share some common physical characteristics, which led to them being treated by carvers in a very similar way. They both occupy a comparable place on the spectrum of hard to soft and are allowed to be worked very easily. So they can be carved with the same tools, but also with very intricate detail, which is not possible for other woods and softer woods like linden. Boxwood was a rare material in the 1600s and had to be imported from the Mediterranean. And boxwood is actually a shrub with trunks, which actually do not grow much bigger than an arm. So, but it is very, very, very hard and can be carved in very much in more detail than other woods, as I said. Ivory really typically refers to the tusks of African and Asian ivory elephants, though teeth and tusks of other animals such as walruses or narwhals might be also sometimes called ivory. Here we have a beautiful handle of a pitcher or tankard, we don't know for sure, which is probably carved by Johann Michael Maucher. As I said, due to its exceptional workability, ivory could be carved with similar tools as woodworkers with chisels and knives. And afterwards, the ivory was polished to enhance the creamy, translucent whiteness of the materials. Ivory was a very rare and very expensive material back in the day, and carvers were extremely careful to maximize the use of each tusk and not wanting to waste anything of the material. Here gives you this like little diagram, gives you what parts of the tusk were used for what types of sculpture and carving. What we also explain in this gallery is why we lost names of artists over time and call them by the substitutes names like Master of, which is a common art historical practice. As I said, signing decorative arts and sculpture was rare at the time, and archival records are often no longer existing because archives got destroyed or didn't survive for various reasons. Um, this uh, uh, this is a representation model of a reliquary by Balthazar Griezmann. And Balthazar Griezmann is actually a wonderful example for a master who was unknown for a very long period until a researcher was able to restore his identity. In the 1990s, an Austrian scholar named Franz Wagner discovered Griezmann's names in the archives of Salzburg in Austria in the Book of the Dead of the hospital of St. John's Hospital, where it actually was recorded that Griezmann died at the age of 86 in 1706. So we can reconstruct when he was born and who he was actually. I mean, we still don't know much about him. His life is still much a mystery, but we know that he was born in southern Germany and worked in Vienna before eventually relocating to Salzburg about 1660. And there he served as court artist for two successive archbishops, which before his death in 1706. But all of Griezmann's works that we know of are actually ivory. So why do we attribute this work in Lindenwood to it? And it's really, again, attribution by style. Griezmann was one of the artists who monogrammed some of his work, so we know we have a better work of arts that we can work with and know which were made by him. So we know his style a little bit, which is like for him, it's really like in the details again, and he has a really distinct style of carving leaves actually. And this is really how we attributed this work of art to him too. We assumed that this object was a presentation model made in an inexpensive wood to be executed at a later point in a more exquisite material, such as ivory, when it was commissioned by someone. Lindenwood was readily available and easy to carve, but not suitable for achieving the intricate detail that really was possible with ivory or boxwood. The object's form here points to that it was tailored towards a Catholic patron. The covered bowl here could hold a relic, while we have here three little cartouches and hats on top of them. And the three hats represent the head of a bishop, a cardinal, and a pope. And when commissioned, it was likely that then these little cartouches would have been filled with the respective coat of arms of the person who bought it. Another aspect of workshop practices we address is how the different types of workshops worked actually together. Here we have two tankards, probably both one executed in Germany, Augsburg, and one executed in Switzerland. And ivory carvers often work together with other craftsmen, such as goldsmiths, to mount or finish their creations. As you also saw, we have removed a couple of the boxwood and ivory objects from other galleries, among them the Kunstkammer, but we've also chosen two silver gilt ivory tankards, which has not been on view for a very long time. And this is also, on a side note, always a really good opportunity to look at the objects, and our conservators spend hours and hours of cleaning and addressing these and polishing these two tankards. So big shout out to Casey Malkinrod and Kat Saris, who really did an exceptional work here. So here we have actually a tankard with a drunken Bacchus, the Roman god of wine, who emerges from the surface here and indulging in the pleasures of life, surrounded by his entourage. We don't know who the carver was. We attribute it by style again to the southern area, probably Augsburg, but we do know who made the silver mounts. It was Augsburg goldsmith David Schwestermüller I. And how do we know it? We do know it because it is marked and stamped. Gold and silversmithing back in the day was a highly regulated craft overseen by the towns and their guilds. All silver and gold pieces produced in a workshop had to bear the mark of the master. Each master had its own mark, and here we see SM Schwestermüller. The objects also were inspected and stamped by the town's assay office, which ensured the metal's quality. In Augsburg, which was an important goldsmith center in the 1600s, the stem was a pyre or pine cone, which we see here. And these marks are really like small. They're usually on the underside of objects, sometimes on the rims. So you have to look for them, but it's really a nice tool for art historian to they give these a little bit of their makers and dates back. The last question we address in this room is really what were these objects made for and for who? And of course, everybody can agree with me, these were not everyday objects and only the wealthy could afford them. But did they really use them? Did they really have their beer at dinner, which in such a tankard together with their bratwurst? Probably not, maybe, no, I'm just kidding, no. These were collected and displayed, often in special cabinets or buffets, and they're often found their way into cabinets of art and curiosity at the times. Carvings with religious imagery could have also served as devotional objects, either in clerical or private context. But if you might have noticed, our Fall of Man, and I mentioned that before, is usually exhibited in our cabinet of art and curiosity here at the Wadsworth, with at the second floor, a stop you have to make too at the museum. And it's here in this very back, in this corner cabinet here. Cabinets of art and curiosity, or Kunstkammer, Kunst- und Wunderkammers, as they're called in German, were widespread collections in the 17th century Western Europe, in particular in the German-speaking territories. The European Kunstkammer was a place of universal learning and humanist scholarship, and they were really meant to be a reflection of the world in miniature and to illustrate the place of human beings in the universe. I'm not going to go into any depth about the general idea and organization of a Kunst- und Wunderkammer. You're more than welcome to explore it on our website or in the museum. But just so much, we have organized our Kunstkammer in 4 sections or quadrants: exploration, artistry, antiquity, and belief. And the ivory falls into our section of artistry here. Here it is, you see a closer view of the case, how it's usually displayed. So within a Kunstkammer, the value of an object was defined by its rarity, its origin, and or its workmanship and craftsmanship. So-called exotica or non-European materials were highly sought after collectibles. And exotic materials, really altered by the hand of skilled European craftsmen, were often used to demonstrate the ability of humans, of course we're talking here about Europeans only, to elevate nature through art. At the beginning of the 17th century, ivory was such a rare and high-priced exotic material. And this leads us over to the third room. The third room in this exhibition really provides a brief history of the trade and the use of ivory, as well as a context for considering these historical works of art in light of contemporary ivory conservation efforts. We also have a PowerPoint here for you with ivory art objects through the ages. So ivory has been used for thousands of years by cultures all around the globe as a material for creating art. So we start this PowerPoint with the earliest known carving of a mammoth, which is actually 35,000 years old. As you might imagine, ivory's history is complex, and there have been devastating consequences for elephants and humans alike through its inextricable links to the slave trade. As early as 300 before Christ, Arabian people on Africa's east coast were exporting ivories to ports in the Mediterranean, India, and China. Excavation of seaports and settlements along the East African coastline have revealed a sophisticated trade network dated to before the 900s. Elephants of the African savanna were hunted by indigenous populations that traded the tusks to herders on the East Coast. The tusks were then dealt to seafaring Swahili traders who transported them and other valuable American goods over vast distances, north to the ports of the Mediterranean, as well as east to India and China. West Saharan trade developed by the 1300s, sending ivories to cities like Paris and Amsterdam. very little is actually then known what actually happened then, and how they actually get to the workshops or to the patrons or the customers really when they arrived into the European cities. But around 1350, the Swahili trade routes were interrupted by the expansion of the Ottoman Empire into North Africa, ending the steady supply of African elephant ivory for over 2 centuries. And then from the late 1500s to the 1800s, many European nations operated mercantile monopolies along Africa's western coast. Supplied really by Africans with tusks from the continent's interiors, these trading companies dominated the ivory trade, but also trafficked in enslaved Africans, sending millions of peoples to be sold into the Americans. And here we see really this triangle trade. By the middle of the 1800s, the West Coast trade ebbed, but the Swahili-dominated East African trade rose to unprecedented heights. The emerging industrial ivory market and consumers in Asia, Europe, and America had a ferocious demand for ivory. Enslaved African carried tons of elephant tusks to the East Coast, where both were sold. So it was really the 19th century that saw a huge expansion of ivory trade and a deeply troubled association with slavery and abuse, as well as overhunting, which has continued to the present. We also addressed the role that Connecticut played in the ivory industry in the 19th century. In 1799, Deacon Phineas Pratt, a goldsmith and clockmaker living in what is now Ivoryton in Connecticut, patented a machine for making combs. And really in mechanizing this production, he ushered into the age of mass production for ivory, making it accessible also for the middle class. The rise of pianos in the homes and the billiard parlor fueled a dramatic increase in demand for African elephant tusk. The lower Connecticut River Valley became the center of ivory production in America, and where really the state's gun industry also, on the other hand, provided the weapons to kill the elephants. Connecticut's ivory supply came primarily from Swahili traders who often used enslaved Africans to transport tons of ivory from the East African bush to the markets of Zanzibar, where the ivory and slaves would be sold. Between 1891 and 1903, 2 major factories in Connecticut, Comstock Cheney and Company and Pratt Reed & Co., processed more than 2.5 million pounds of ivory. And by the turn of the 20th century, together were processing 90% of ivory imported to the United States. So one might really ask, why are we celebrating ivory sculptures included in this exhibition? The Wadsworth really strongly believes the display of historical ivory works of art and the conservation of elephants today are not contradictory. Society actually has an obligation to preserve both cultural heritage on the one side and wild animals on the other side. This exhibition for us is really an opportunity to learn about our past, but also at the same time to advocate for the conservation of elephants. So that was it from my side. Thank you very much. I have here another slide for you. Just if you want to learn more about elephant conservation efforts, you are welcome to look at these these websites. And yeah, with that, I would stop share and see if there's any questions or any remarks. Are you muted, Anne?
Vanessa, thank you so much for that talk that gave us a terrific exploration of especially these 2 objects and all the stories that they can tell. It was a wonderful reminder to visit our Cabinet of Art and Curiosity too, to explore further if people come to see the exhibition. Just checking the chat box to see if there are any questions, and if there are, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and Vanessa will stay on as long as there are questions being asked. I might ask you a question, Vanessa. What was in your opinion, the most exciting discovery or the most exciting learning that you take away from being able to compare these two works by the master of the Martyrdom of Saint Sebastian so closely and for such a long time?
That we were right. That it's like, yeah, it was really like to see these two together and to really like, yes, the stylistic, there's been one hand. You could see it was like really, you could, when you stand in front of the case and see them next to each other, you could see like, this is one hand. This is not, this is one really much. So attribution by style is really, yeah, it really works. So it's really rare as because we read all about this, to read it in theory, but really seeing it with your eyes and having the opportunity to really compare or side by side is an exception. So I encourage all of you to like come and look closely at the details. That's it. That's the key.
Yeah, this was actually a wonderful introduction to the exhibition. It was actually great that we were on Zoom so that you could show us some of those really intimate details that we wouldn't have been able to look at otherwise, except through some kind of slide presentation. So it was a great teaser.
Yeah, and you remember, Ellen, when we always, everybody has a different interpretation about these emotions. So go look for yourself and think yourself. I mean, we discussed it in length, and each one of us had like, oh, do you think, or what? Yeah. So it was just, everybody can have an opinion here.
I see some questions in the chat box. Someone has asked, were boxwood items finished with any protective substances?
No, not really, but and later, I mean, Casey could speak to that more. We could see that there is, if we turn it, there is a layer of something on our boxwood ivory. So it was, but not all of them are. You'd probably think of a varnish or like something like the varnish, like the paintings did not really like that, but there is sometimes a layer that darkens it. For example, our ivory did that, yes, but we don't know when this actually was applied, if it was a later addition or if it was at the time.
Great, thank you. And other thanks to Vanessa in the chat box. This was fascinating. We have a couple of docents in attendance who will be probably including the exhibition on their tours. So if we have people who are coming on docent tours, ask to see this show. Another question from Celia: are you allowed to borrow ivory objects from overseas collections, as it's almost impossible to buy ivory objects?
Yes, it is. It is really hard, and it is. I don't think we would do it right now. We would not lend our objects to anything, and we're not no, it's really hard to get. There might be exceptions, but in general, I say no. We're not right now. It's really hard. So that's another point. We have this incredible piece of ivory in our collection, which like all of the European museums like envy us for. I know that. Yeah. So it's really an exception. And we're like, we wouldn't lend it to anything. And we're like not. I mean, there have been exception. The Met had a great exhibition making marbles, and they had some ivory objects. So I think it's possible, but it's with a lot, and it's also from state to state. And I'm not like Connecticut and New York have other rules. So, but it is really hard to do that.
Yeah. Another question from Ernesto: what styles or artists influence the master?
This is a great question. Yeah, I cut that from the talk. He was really, I mean, of course, like, yeah, we look at other Flemish and Baroque artists at the time, and it was really like, we go back to Rubens. There's a lot of Rubens references. I actually, I cut that really from the talk because I thought I don't have enough time, but yeah, there is a preparatory drawing of our well, there is a drawing of our ivory, but it was thought that it was a preparatory, but it's not. It is actually a drawing after, and really the composition is really like on Rubens' Adam and Eve based, like a riff off of that, if you could say so. So yeah, this was really the area that he was influenced by.
Great, thank you. I see our other curator of European decorative arts chimed in, Linda Roth, says that it's possible to borrow ivory objects, but very difficult.
Yes.
And I would also just like to invite everyone who's in attendance at this Zoom meeting to know that Linda Roth will be giving a talk in the gallery on September 24th at 1:00 p.m. It is planned to take place in the gallery at this point. So we'll hope for a small group that can fit in there. And I expect Vanessa will be there too.
Of course. I always take an opportunity to be in the galleries.
Any other questions for Vanessa? I think we got through the Q&A and the chat. So I would just say thank you so much, Vanessa, for this talk. And I hope it does bring in everyone here who's listening. Tell your friends and family to come see these incredible objects in person.
Yes, do that. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you all. Have a great day.